After that night at the restaurant, I thought the hard part was over. I thought Sam would need time to process, maybe call me later to yell or cry, and then finally, things would settle. I was wrong. The very next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from Sam. At first, they were almost normal. Can we talk? Please don't ignore me. But by noon, the tone had shifted. She was blaming me for everything. You could have handled this better. One read. Another, I can't believe you just used Alex's method on me. Do you even care about me at all? It was the same pattern she praised for months. Calm, calculated, supposedly mature, now turned into a weapon against me. I didn't respond. I had learned the hard way that any reaction I gave would feed her narrative. Instead, I blocked notifications from her social media and set up email filters to redirect anything from her to a separate folder I wouldn't check. Let her stew. Let her realize she didn't control the story anymore. But Sam didn't give up. Within a few days, she was showing up at my apartment unannounced. The first time, I opened the door just a crack. Chain still on. Ryan, she said, voice deceptively calm. We need to talk about this. Face to face, like adults. I paused, letting her stand there in the hallway. Interesting, I said slowly. I've actually been recording the locations of my valuables ever since you started comparing me to Alex. My grandfather's watch? I have photos of it right here. Would you like me to involve the police to retrieve them safely? Her eyes went wide. She hesitated. Then, finally, she left. The next day, the watch mysteriously appeared in my mailbox. Classic Sam. Dramatic, entitled, but ultimately powerless. Things escalated from there. She somehow convinced our mutual friends to host a dinner party and invited both of us. Without telling me she would be there, I showed up, expecting a casual get-together, only to find Sam armed with a folder full of printed screenshots, photos, and notes analyzing our relationship timeline. She had even prepared a PowerPoint. A PowerPoint. She called it a relationship intervention, standing in the middle of my friend's living room like some kind of director orchestrating a play. Mandatory daily phone calls, weekly date nights, and a strict learning curriculum on how I should adopt Alex's past methods. She genuinely thought this would force me to reconcile. Our friends were mortified, and honestly, I was too. If I wasn't careful, it could have spiraled into a humiliating scene. But I stayed calm. Calm, measured, collected. The very quality she had praised Alex for. I pulled out my phone and played a recording from our breakup dinner, where she had spent 10 minutes describing how perfect Alex's method of ending things was. Then I followed it with clips of her constant comparisons between me and him. Since you're so fond of presentations, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, here's evidence of why this relationship ended. Care to explain why it's mature when he does it, but unacceptable when I follow the exact same approach? Her face went pale. She looked like she was about to melt into the carpet. She stammered, tried to protest, but nothing worked. My friends exchanged looks, half shock, half admiration for my restraint. I stayed calm, just as Alex supposedly had. After that night, I thought the drama might finally subside. But Sam was nothing if not persistent. A week later, she recreated a date scenario, the same French restaurant where we'd broken up. She even wore the dress from our first date together. She had friends convincing me to meet for a group dinner. But when I arrived, it was just her and the slideshow comparing our milestones with her past relationships. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just turned and walked out. She followed me into the parking lot, insisting I was violating some relationship resolution protocol Alex had established. According to her, I was supposed to give her 3 chances to fix things before the final breakup. I just looked at her and shook my head. Over the next month, her antics kept escalating. She contacted my sister on social media, sending her a detailed plan titled Why Your Brother Needs to Follow Proven Breakup Recovery Steps. My sister, smart as always, blocked her and sent me screenshots. Then came the calendar invites, daily reflection sessions, weekly improvement meetings, agendas filled with comparisons to Alex's methods. I set up filters to automatically decline everything, with a message. Sorry, I'm busy taking tips from your ex on how to maintain boundaries post-breakup. The final straw came at my gym. She had somehow signed up, even though she never worked out there, and approached me while I was on the treadmill. She had another folder of strategies, this time detailing Alex's workout habits and how couples should sweat together for bonding. I stopped, looked her straight in the eyes, and said loud enough for the people around to hear, "You know what I learned from all your stories about Alex? He was right to end things with someone who can't respect boundaries. I'm calling gym management about harassment next, and my next call will be to discuss the restraining order. Care to explain to a judge why you're stalking me with PowerPoint presentations about your ex?" Her face went white. She finally seemed to understand. In a way, she had been given a live demonstration of her own behavior. She left the gym that day, and I haven't seen her since. Friends tell me she's taking a break from dating to focus on personal growth. For me, life has slowly returned to normal. The breakup was calculated, yes, but necessary. Sometimes the only way to make someone see their toxic behavior is to let them experience it from the other side. And now, when I date, the first thing I notice is how someone talks about their past relationships. It's amazing how much that reveals. After the gym incident, the days felt almost surreal. It was like the world had shifted slightly. The chaos that Sam had brought into my life had stopped, but her presence lingered like a shadow in the corners of my mind. I realized that even though I had ended things and set firm boundaries, the emotional residue of her obsession wasn't going to disappear overnight. I started small, taking long walks in the park, something I hadn't done in months. Every time I saw a couple laughing together or planning a weekend getaway, a part of me flinched. For a brief moment, I feared that I would carry Sam's shadow into every relationship I had. But I also realized something important. I had survived this. I had survived a relationship that had slowly tried to erase me, that had used comparisons and manipulation as a way to control me. That was not a small victory. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into projects I'd been putting off for months, focusing on tasks that required creativity and strategy. For the first time in a long while, I noticed a satisfaction that came from accomplishing something purely for myself rather than for the approval or admiration of someone else. Sam had tried to mold me into Alex, and I had resisted. The realization was empowering. Then there were the little reminders of her obsession, the occasional text from a mutual friend asking if I was handling Sam's antics okay, or overhearing her name mentioned casually. At first, these triggered anger, but over time, they became part of the background noise of life. I stopped reacting and started observing. I noticed patterns in human behavior I hadn't seen before. The way someone's fixation can dictate their actions, how people cling to idealized versions of the past to avoid facing reality. I also began reflecting on my own boundaries. I realized how critical it was to recognize red flags early, to trust instincts when something feels off. Sam had given me the ultimate lesson in that. Constant comparisons, unsolicited advice, and the romanticizing of an ex's behavior were all signals I shouldn't ignore. And now, I had a guide for future relationships, not in a manipulative sense, but as a reminder to protect my sense of self. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the height of Sam's obsession. Dinner parties, hikes, casual nights out. Each moment reaffirmed that life could be simple and enjoyable without drama. But I also started noticing the patterns in my own reactions. Every time I began to feel guilty about cutting her off, I reminded myself of the restaurant, the texts, the PowerPoint presentations, and the gym incident. That wasn't just a breakup. That was a masterclass in why boundaries matter. And then something unexpected happened. I started dating again, tentatively, cautiously. My first date after Sam was with Claire, a graphic designer I met at a mutual friend's art show. She was witty, self-aware, and most importantly, she didn't bring up past relationships unless it was relevant to a conversation. I noticed the contrast immediately. Whereas Sam had constantly measured me against someone from her past, Claire focused on me, and that felt revolutionary. On one of our early dates, we talked about past relationships lightly. Claire mentioned her ex in passing, without comparisons or expectations. She laughed at some of her past mistakes, acknowledged growth, and then moved on. I realized how rare that was, to be with someone who viewed the past as a learning experience, not a blueprint for control. During this time, I also processed the recordings and documents I had kept of Sam's behavior. At first, I thought I might use them as a cautionary tale, or even as evidence if things escalated legally. But as weeks passed, I realized their value was entirely personal. They were a map of what I wouldn't accept in the future, a reminder that emotional manipulation often comes in subtle, insidious forms. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. Months went by. I learned to spot the red flags in conversations, in gestures, and in patterns of behavior. I became more assertive, more confident in my choices, and more selective about who I let into my life. Sam became less of a looming presence and more of a lesson etched into my memory, vivid, uncomfortable, but necessary. And then came the closure I hadn't expected. One evening, a mutual friend mentioned seeing Sam at a coffee shop, sitting alone, scrolling through her phone. They didn't say much, just that she looked reflective, quiet. That image struck me in an unexpected way. For months, I had imagined dramatic confrontations, more manipulations, maybe even legal battles. But here she was, just a person dealing with her own mess, probably realizing that life doesn't always follow the scripts we create for ourselves. I thought about the breakup dinner, the texts, the gym encounter, and I realized I had done exactly what I needed to do. I hadn't retaliated unnecessarily. I hadn't sought to humiliate her for my own satisfaction. I had maintained calm boundaries and dignity. That, in itself, was a form of victory. By the time I went on my fourth date with Claire, I felt lighter. I didn't carry resentment or fear. I was present. I could enjoy conversation without worrying that someone would suddenly compare me to a ghost from the past. And in that clarity, I saw how much I had grown emotionally, mentally, and even socially. Sam had been a storm in my life, unpredictable and intense, but surviving it had taught me resilience. I could now approach relationships with confidence, recognizing toxicity early, valuing boundaries, and understanding that no one, not even someone we care about, should try to remake us in the image of someone else. It was a strange kind of gratitude, not for what she had done to me, but for the lesson embedded in the chaos. The storm had passed, and now, for the first time in years, I could breathe freely. Life felt open, expansive, and most importantly, mine again. Months had passed since the last encounter with Sam. Life had started to feel normal again, peaceful even, though I was still cautious. The experience had left its mark, teaching me lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and the dangers of letting someone else dictate your identity. One Saturday afternoon, I was at a coffee shop near my apartment, sipping an oversweetened latte and scrolling through emails. Claire had suggested meeting here after her art class, and I was looking forward to seeing her. That's when I noticed her, Sam. She was sitting at a corner table, alone, staring at her phone. She looked different, less confident, less theatrical, more human. It struck me how time and distance had reshaped her. No PowerPoints, no dramatic gestures, just a person trying to process her own life. I debated briefly about approaching her. Part of me wanted to check if she'd learned anything. Another part didn't want to engage at all. Ultimately, I chose silence. This time, the story was over for me. Whatever lessons she was learning now, I didn't need to be part of them. Over the next few weeks, life settled fully. Claire and I kept dating, slowly, cautiously, but it felt natural. We explored the city together, tried new restaurants, and shared quiet nights at home. For the first time in a long time, I could exist in a relationship without fear of being measured against a ghost from the past. I was present, engaged, and completely myself. The lingering lessons from Sam's obsession began to solidify. I realized I had learned far more than I had expected from the chaos. I learned how to recognize subtle manipulation, how to enforce boundaries firmly without guilt, and how important it was to notice the way someone talks about past relationships. It's revealing, much more than people realize. I also learned patience, the value of calm reasoning, and that sometimes the most perfect way to handle a difficult situation isn't grand gestures, but consistency, clarity, and maintaining your own dignity. Months later, I caught myself laughing at something Claire said about her ex, a harmless story, funny and lighthearted. No comparisons, no lessons to implement, just a story. and I realized just how far I had come. I didn't flinch, didn't feel threatened, didn't have to measure myself. I could fully enjoy the moment without the shadow of someone else looming over me. One evening, I received a short, unexpected email from Sam. It was brief, understated. "I'm working on myself. I hope you're well. Sam." No manipulation, no dramatics. Just a sign that maybe she had finally begun her own journey of self-awareness. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The email was enough to mark the closure I'd been seeking. I filed away mentally and returned to the present, to Claire, to my friends, and to myself. I had survived a relationship designed to remake me, and I had emerged intact. More than intact, actually. Stronger, more self-assured, and more attentive to the qualities that truly matter in a partner: honesty, respect, and the ability to move forward without dragging ghosts along. Looking back, I realized that the breakup, as painful and surreal as it had been, was necessary. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but as a lesson for both of us. Sam had finally been confronted with the consequences of her obsession and idealization. I had finally reclaimed my life, my identity, and my peace of mind. Life continued. I learned to trust my instincts. I learned to value healthy communication over performance or idealized behavior. I learned that being calm, consistent, and self-aware often matters far more than any perfect gesture. And most importantly, I learned that I deserved to be in a relationship where my individuality was celebrated, not compared, molded, or measured. As for Sam, I never crossed paths with her again in a meaningful way. From what mutual friends shared, she had decided to focus on herself for the foreseeable future. And honestly, that was enough. I had my closure. My life was moving forward, and this chapter, once chaotic and consuming, had finally ended. For me, the future was no longer dictated by someone else's past. I could date, explore, grow, and live on my own terms. And that, above everything else, was freedom. And with that, our story comes to an end, but the real story begins with your thoughts. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let me know in the comments.